On the 4th of December 1941, a camera-armed Spitfire raced at wave-top height towards the coast of occupied France. Pulling up sharply over a lone villa, it snapped this photograph of a previously unseen device which would strike fear into the hearts of Allied planners. This very image started a chain of events which would see 120 elite paratroopers descend on the site in one of the most daring missions of the Second World War. In this video, with the help of veteran testimony, original wartime imagery and the latest technology, we'll tell the story of Operation Biting, otherwise known as the Bruneval Raid. To tell that story, we need to understand the global picture as it stood at the end of 1941, and it was a bleak one for the Allies. At that time, the Germans were utterly dominant in Europe. To the west, France, Belgium and the Netherlands had long since fallen, and the British, though victorious in the Battle of Britain, were firmly on the defensive. And to the east, the German army was rampaging through Soviet Russia. In short, the war was going badly for the Allies. Despite the general outlook, there was still a desire on the part of the British to take the fight to the enemy with any means possible. At the very top of that list was raids by aircraft of the Royal Air Force, but with heavy losses, particularly to bomber crews, gaining any edge in the fight was vital. That photograph, taken by Flight Lieutenant Tony Hill in December, seriously threatened the British ability to win that fight. Once returned to RAF Medmenham, the film of that Spitfire reconnaissance sortie was closely examined by some of the greatest minds in British intelligence. Amongst them was one of Britain's leading figures in the Second World War, Dr. R.V. Jones. Jones, against the run of general opinion, had for some time believed that not only did Germany possess radar capability, but in fact their equipment may have been more advanced than the famous British chain home system. The emergence of this photo, showing a hitherto unknown piece of equipment strategically placed on the French coast, seemed to confirm his suspicions. Something needed to be done. That something was in essence quite simple: steal it. To truly understand the potential of this new device and to gain a real advantage in the radar race, it was decided that a pinch raid should be conducted as soon as possible to capture and return vital components to the UK for testing of its performance. Enter Combined Operations. Created as early as 1940 as a special service force, it consisted of highly trained specialists including the newly formed Commandos and British Airborne Forces. Their role was to conduct small-scale targeted strikes against vital targets just like the radar system at Bruneval. But whilst the purpose of the raid was simple, the execution was far more complex. Let's understand why. Situated on top of a series of sheer cliffs near the small village of Bruneval to the north of the port town of Le Havre, the site itself was very difficult to access. Located around a now demolished villa which once sat here, there were a number of structures and emplacements in the vicinity, as well as a nearby building complex known as Le Presbytère, which housed a garrison of perhaps as many as 100 German troops. The identified radar pit was to be found here, and the only viable link to the sea was to be found down a steep valley side in this area, leading to a German defensive position and headquarters building overlooking a small beach at the bottom of the valley. The usual method employed by the British at this time would be a seaborne invasion, but vital intelligence provided by the French resistance under the legendary Colonel Remy had revealed the area to be heavily defended from seaborne attack. In order to reach the site, a force would need to breach those defences, climb this steep valley, nullify the now alerted defenders of the radar site, capture, dismantle and carry it back to their landing point, hoping of course that the Germans wouldn't destroy it before the Allied raiders even got there. In short, a seaborne assault simply wasn't practical. But there was another way. If the Allies could land behind those defences and take the enemy by surprise, they might just be able to grab those vital assets, take out the German beach defences from the rear and then evacuate by sea. For that to happen, the airborne needed to take the lead. Enter Major John Frost. By turning to the vast archives available through Findmypast, we can learn a little more about this remarkable man. Amongst the available records is this, the 1912 baptism of a John Dutton Frost in Pune, India. His father Frank is listed at that time as a lieutenant in the British Army, a profession his son was to follow. Next, in 1930 we find 17-year-old John's army entrance examination for a cadetship at Sandhurst College. Included here is a statement from John's mother confirming his age and place of birth. We also learn that young John attended the prestigious Wellington College in the late 1920s before being commissioned into the army. Aged just 28 in 1942, Frost, then a temporary major, had volunteered for the fledgling airborne when it had been created and was ultimately selected to lead a party of 120 men from the almost entirely Scottish C Company 2nd Parachute Battalion in the assault on Bruneval. His plan looked something like this. Flying across the Channel in 12 specially adapted Whitley bombers, commanded by the legendary Wing Commander Pickard, and each carrying 10 men and their equipment, Frost's force would parachute into this area, some 650 yards to the rear of the radar site, before assembling here to begin their assault. Splitting into 5 groups, each named for a famous admiral, they would simultaneously assault the villa, capture the radar pit and disassemble its components, knock out beach defences to secure an extraction point, form a defensive screen to the east of the site and hold at readiness a reserve force for unseen eventualities. Once complete, the entire force would head to this nearby beach for a waiting naval flotilla to pick them up and carry them home. But what exactly were they after? Well, once the mission had been approved, Dr. R.V. Jones had created a shopping list of key components of the radar array that would be vital to understanding its potential. Amongst other things, he needed the main antenna and various smaller items, but also he wanted the instrument labels and serial number of each component to understand just how many sets the Germans had produced. In order to gather that material, an expert was needed on the ground. That man was Flight Sergeant Charles Cox, an RAF radar technician who would oversee the gathering of equipment, which would be loaded into specially built folding trolleys and carried to the extraction point. Cox himself, who had been rushed through jump training just days before the raid, was key to the success of the mission. By the 27th of February 1942, all was in place, and 120 highly trained men filed into their Whitley bombers for the perilous journey to occupied France. Taking off shortly after 11 PM from RAF Thruxton, the 12 aircraft headed for their target. By 12:10, the force was nearing the coast and, led by Wing Commander Pickard, began its approach. Over the next few minutes, every man prepared to exit through the specially cut hole in the Whitley's fuselage onto the drop zone. Amongst them was Sergeant MacLeod Forsyth, who recalled the moment.
When the red light went on, you got ready to jump. The first man with his feet in the hole, Corporal Walker. I was watching him and I saw his face turn a different colour. The green light came on and it was bang, bang, bang like that. Go, go, go! And I suddenly realised there were only 3 men to go and I was still at the end of the plane. I was concentrating so hard on them I forgot about myself. I more or less threw myself out. When I got down and we started to get everything organised, I said to Corporal Walker, "What happened up there? I saw your face change colour." He said, "So would yours if you looked down and saw the bloody tracer coming up at you."
But not all went to plan. 2 of those aircraft, one of which was flown by Pickard himself, actually missed their target and dropped their sticks several miles away in this area. For the rest, the drop went well, and within just a few minutes Frost's force was on the ground and, crucially, there was no gunfire. Reshuffling his force on hearing that 2 of his parties were missing, Frost soon learned that all his available radios were malfunctioning and runners had to be used to maintain communications. Nevertheless, his force set off, a little behind schedule, with Frost himself leading Hardy section in the assault on the villa. Crossing this very ground from the rendezvous, they approached the villa from the rear, finding it open and almost completely deserted. Storming into the position, the single German sentry encounter was quickly dispatched and the villa captured. At the same time, just a few yards away, the radar pit team, including Sergeant Cox, reached their target, finding a single German radar operator who was swiftly captured. Originally it was planned that 30 minutes could be spent to disassemble the relevant radar pieces, but with delays in arriving, Cox was told he had just a few minutes to get all he needed. With sapper support, they began sawing and dismantling as much as they could. At the same time, Lieutenant Vernon, armed with a camera to photograph the remaining key components, took this single photograph, the flash of which brought the very first enemy gunfire down onto the attackers. Clearly confused but now alerted, the enemy fire would increase throughout the remainder of the raid. A little further down the coast, the 20 men of the Nelson Beach Party and the 20 misdrop men who were racing as fast as they could to catch up closed in on their objective. This position, covered by barbed wire and machine guns, simply had to be taken if the raiders were to get home. By 1 AM, and under increasingly heavy fire, the force at the villa and radar pit, their jobs complete, planted demolition charges on the structures around the villa, and under cover of the explosions began the arduous journey, carrying heavy equipment and several wounded men on a moonless night down this snow-covered track to the valley below. Reaching approximately this position here, a rattle of gunfire showed that it had not been taken. It was now that CSM Strawn was badly wounded with a bullet to the abdomen, and Private Scott and McIntyre were killed. Confused as to the strength of the enemy ahead, and with the villa now reoccupied by the defenders and the volume of fire increasing all the time, the attackers were in a perilous position. Then the Nelson Party struck. Attacking from the rear of the German seaward defences, the Beach Party assaulted several German machine gun positions, and in a short but bloody fight captured them and Stella Marie, this pre-war casino which had since been taken over as the local German headquarters. Within minutes, the vital extraction point had been secured and Frost's men could continue their advance to the beach. Their timing was perfect. By 2:35, the first landing craft, despite not having radio contact with the paratroopers, had touched shore, and the raiders, desperate to reach the safety of their awaiting flotilla, rushed to the craft which would take them and their precious cargo home. Over the next few minutes, 112 raiders, 2 prisoners and almost all RV Jones's requested components slipped away from the shore into the night under the cover of gunboat fire. MacLeod Forsyth was amongst the last to leave, and he recalled a close call in those final moments.
I was on the last landing craft. It came in on a wave, and when the wave went away, it was caught on a jutting out piece of rock. The Navy man says, "Get underneath it and lift it." I said, "Christ, lift this and we're prisoners." The Germans by this time, some of them had got on the cliff top and were firing down at us, tracer flying everywhere, ricochets, you know. Luckily enough, we eventually got off all right.
The Bruneval Raid was over. All told, the operation had lasted just 140 minutes, but the impact was huge. In the coming days and weeks, those captured components, along with the German radar operator taken in the raid, revealed a wealth of information about the new Würzburg radar, which had the potential to identify aircraft approaching land up to 25 miles away, but at a much higher level of accuracy than previously achieved. That capture also provided a huge step forward in Allied signal jamming technology, which would be essential in the D-Day landings along this same coast in 1944. Almost immediately after the raid, the Germans began a review of just what happened that night and how success had been achieved. The official report stated, "The operation of the British commandos was well planned and executed with great discipline. Although attacked by German soldiers, they concentrated on their primary task. The raid had been a great success due in large measure to the element of surprise." The subsequent response was also unexpectedly advantageous to the Allies. Hitler had ordered that henceforth all radar stations were to be heavily defended, including by belts of barbed wire around the entire site. This small but significant change made it much easier for Allied photo reconnaissance to identify previously unseen installations all along the Atlantic coast, which had plagued RAF Bomber Command. Operation Biting, the Bruneval Raid, had in all truth been a remarkable success. But that success did not come without cost. 2 men, Private Scott and McIntyre, lost their lives that night and are today buried in nearby Le Havre Cemetery. And a further 8 men were wounded. 6 more were left behind in the darkness, all of whom would later be captured. Many more Bruneval Raiders would go on to see further action in the war, often not living to see its end. But for all who took part in that vital mission in 1942, it was a night they would never forget. Thanks for watching. We want to offer a special thanks to our sponsors, Findmypast, whose records proved vital in telling the story of those who took part in the Bruneval Raid. If you'd like to know more, be sure to check out the link in the description below. If you'd like to know more about famous actions of the Second World War, why not check out our video on the Amiens prison raid, led by none other than Charles Pickard, right here on YouTube. That's all this time, and we'll see you again soon.